We are now going to proceed to make a post and core pattern for tooth number 11. All of the preliminary preparation work has been accomplished with a minor exception, but we have prepared the interproximal surfaces of the preparation to the subgingival finish line. We have prepared the lingual surface with a football-shaped diamond so that there is a lingual fossa, the lingual or palatal aspect, I should say, of this canine. The only preparation work that will be needed after the post and core is cemented is the lowering of this aspect of the shoulder down to the gingival margin, free gingival margin, and the refinement of the finish line in that area. It has been retained at the moment because it's providing a finish line for the provisional restoration. We will proceed to make a post and core pattern that completely fills the post space and onlays a new incisal tip to the preparation. Close, please. In this closed occlusal position, you can see that there is sufficient space for a post and core to onlay the lingual cuss tip and to provide space for metal and porcelain for the actual casting. Open, please. So we'll now proceed. Now the first thing that I want to do is measure the length of the post space, and it is to this reference point 8 millimeters below our shoulder. I will then take one of the green endo posts, plastic prefabricated posts, and put it in position and make certain that it goes all the way to the bottom without binding. I'll then remove it with a pair of cotton pliers at the point where it touches the shoulder and check to see if I have 8 millimeters, and I do, which confirms that this plastic pattern is going all the way to the bottom of the prepared post space. Now the next thing that I want to do is to lubricate the inside of the canal so that the Duralay will not get stuck. And to do that, we could use Duralay lubricant, we could use Vaseline, or we could use saliva. And frankly, of all the three materials, the least viscous and most effective is saliva. So what I'd like you to do is to close and slurp up a nice little bit of saliva right on top of that tooth. Alrighty, now open wide. Thank you. And now I'm going to just make certain that that saliva is not in gross excessive amounts. You can see it's glistening. And I've used the perio probe to smooth it and to distribute it around the surfaces of the post space. And I'll now just give it a gentle blast so that it's not in gross excess. Alrighty, it's now time to make the post part of the pattern. And to do so, I will be beading and flowing Duralay into the canal using a 2/0 camel's hair paintbrush. We use the natural hair fiber paintbrushes for this because Duralay will fall right off the paintbrush. It's not unlike getting hit with a bucket of paint on top of your head. Your hair will clean up. If you use the nylon brushes, the disposable brushes, they are essentially a plastic just like Duralay, and all you succeed in doing is making a much bigger paintbrush and having a certain level of frustration. So we'll use this. We'll dip the brush into the monomer, pick up a little portion of powder, and distribute it right into the canal. That's not in the space yet, but it is in position. Then just with pure monomer, we'll go ahead and put brush right into the tooth to ensure that the Duralay is going all the way down to the bottom of the space. Now I'm going to continue doing this until it's all filled up. If I used a bigger brush that didn't fit into the canal space, then I might have a bit of a problem getting the air bubbles out of there when we don't need air bubbles. I'll then take the plastic pin, dip it in the monomer, and insert it into the space all the way down. To ensure that there's a strong union between the pin and the Duralay, I'm just going to add a little bit more Duralay right here where the two unite up at the top. And now for a very critical step. As this starts to set, I'm going to be removing the excess around the margins of what will eventually be the base of the core. As I'm doing this, those margins, or the residual material right here, is actually distorting a little. But I don't care, because I'm not making the core at the moment, I'm just making the post. After all, this is a post and core. Its very name suggests that it's two entities designed to be done independently and then united as a final product. If it was to be done all at the same time, it would be a post core without the word and. And this little tag will come off nicely in just a minute. And now I'm going to see if the entire body of material is moving. And it is. And this is good, because it means that the acrylic has united to the green pin and it's all coming out of the tooth together. As is true anytime you use acrylic for provisional restorations or for procedures such as this, if you leave it in too long, it may solidify and be very difficult to remove. It can lock in place. If you don't leave it long enough, you may pull the pin right out of the red acrylic. So it's a question of it being just right. Now, would you open just a little bit more for me? And I'm going to remove the pin a little bit more, make sure that it's not grabbing in any unnecessary area. It's caught just a little bit back here, behind it. So we'll free that up. And now it's a matter of taking it in and out so that any undercuts within the system of the root canal space are smoothed off. We'll notice that it's starting to rub a little bit on the buccal surface. So we need to smooth that out. Now open real wide, so I'm going to find a little saliva and just coat the post with the saliva and then put it right back in the tooth. And now it goes in and out smoothly. And I think you can already see that it goes all the way down to the bottom of the root canal space. Now, while I'm doing this, I'd like to talk once again, or a little bit philosophically, about the rationale for cast, post, and cores. The root canal system is generally tapered in the apical third, somewhat parallel in the middle third, and tends to have a slight flare in the occlusal third. Prefabricated posts, such as paraposts, are cylindrical. So there's a propensity for those to be a little too tight, a little too big in the gingival third, just right in the middle third, and too small in the occlusal third. So I figure I would rather use something that fits the entire length of the post space rather than just in the middle third, which is one of the reasons why I like the cast, post, and core. A pattern designed to fit this tooth and no one else's. Now, is it set yet? Well, let's test it and see. Yes, this is now firm. There's no indent whatsoever as I poke with the Explorer on the remaining tooth structure. So, out it comes. You may relax for a moment. I'm now going to remove the edges of the core where I picked away at it with the Explorer so that all of the remaining edges are nice and crisp and clean. Now, I do this by working from the tissue side toward the open side of the pattern. I prefer to use a carbide for this rather than a diamond because it cuts plastic cleaner. But you'll notice that there's always a little bit of flash. And I will then make certain that the light orange flash is taken away from the tissue surface of the core. Otherwise, the pattern won't seat fully. Okay, now we're going to reinsert. And just to confirm that we have a proper post, we're looking for an 8mm length to the spot where we're measuring. And we are there. And we'd like a post that doesn't wobble in any direction. And it's solid. So now the time comes to build up the core. And we'll do that once again by beating and flowing. Now there are a number of different ways of adding the acrylic. Some people like to just build it up in bulk, in excess, and then carve it with a diamond. Carve it with a handpiece. Create a preparation just as you would with natural dentin.
Is it lighter than the other one?
But I don't like doing it that way because that also means that you have to cut the little tip of the green sprue or the former off in order to be able to prepare the tooth. And I like keeping this in place because it then acts as the foundation for a sprue for investing the pattern. And I think it's kind of nice to have a sprue that's actually integral to the entire pattern rather than having to sprue it secondarily and then worry about it falling off when you're actually investing the pattern. Now you'll notice that I'm building the margins to be confluent with the remaining tooth structure. But I don't have to come all the way out to the edge of this remaining dentin. I'm actually overextended just a tad right here. This will have to be cut off later because we need to have room for the porcelain fused to metal crown. Now, as I said, we're going to be onlaying the incisal tip just a little bit. And I'm going to hold the brush in such a position that I'm pushing out that corner. So that it doesn't slump. I'll now do the same on the mesial corner. I'm holding the brush there so that the corner doesn't slump. There comes a point in time when the acrylic has enough rigidity that it stays in place. You can pull the brush away and you still have the tip. And by building these corners, you can then fill in the difference between the corners on the tip and the body of the pattern without it slumping into the shape of a pyramid. So I'm now concentrating on creating a mesial wall to the pattern that's confluent with the finish line of the residual palatal dentin. And now the same on the distal surface. Oh, look at that, a little bit too much. So I'll just trace this through to make sure that we don't have too much excess on that corner. I do want to fill in this zone right here. When you're dealing with the bead and flow technique, you may sometimes find that the little portion of Duralay is a little too moist to work with. And the recommendation when that happens is to just flick it from the brush and get a new piece. And you can drain some of the excess monomer by touching the brush to a paper towel or the patient napkin, and that dries up the little additional portion so that it will then stay where you place it. And this one's being very nice and just flowing right where we want it. Now, I want to be certain that I'm on the lingual finish line. Open, please, a little bit more. And I have to bring this back just a little bit more to complete the onlay on the cuss tip. This may not be visible to the camera as I'm doing it. Open, please. But it is to me. There we are with that. And now I'm just going to put a final slurry of material on the facial just so that it's nice and smooth. Now, when this is cast, we will be trying it in and making final refinements to the marginal fit before it's cemented, and reducing some of the bulk in the gingival third so that it has the proper room for porcelain fused to metal and the proper shape of preparation. There will be, when I remove this, a little bit of flash beyond the margin here on the distal, which I have absolutely no intention of changing now. I'd rather cast it and then remove that little bit once it's in metal. It removes it in a cleaner fashion. But here's our pattern. Post and core. We can see where we're onlayed on the palatal surface. The flash will be removed after it's cast. And when in position, it is absolutely stable and seats all the way. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
And we're all set. Hello, everyone. This is your old friend, Dr. Appleby, again. We thought you might like to see what one of these patterns looked like after it was cast. And here we see the gold post and core for tooth number 11 following permanent cementation about a week ago. Now the final finish lines for the preparation still need to be placed. We need to drop a bevel slightly subgingivally right along here and make certain that there are no undercuts along the face. But essentially, this is very, very close to the original pattern that was fabricated in the Duralay, and it is finished. Thank you very much. Here we are to fabricate another post and core pattern, and the difference, of course, is that there is no remaining coronal tooth structure present. Perhaps we can have a view inside the mirror, and this will show you precisely what is left. We know that this tooth is eminently restorable with a cast post and core and a crown. We have solid tooth structure right at the gum line, all the way around on the facial and the mesial and the palatal surface, with plenty of subgingival tooth upon which to place a bevel. And here on the middle, although there was recurrent decay that went underneath the gum line, it is still coronal to the epithelial attachment, so we have room out here upon which to place a bevel. So the margins of the crown will all be on remaining residual tooth structure, certainly not on the post and core, because that is just not the way it should be done. Now, the post space is about 12 millimeters. 2 millimeters by estimation beyond the 10 millimeter reed. And we take our pattern, prefabricated little green Kerr endo post, and put it in position, and retrieve it with the cotton pliers. And once again, confirming by measurement that it goes all the way to the bottom of the root canal system, we are ready to proceed. So, as before, I like to use saliva as the lubricant for the canal. So would you please close and just sort of let your tongue slurp a little saliva on the tooth. I may not have mentioned this. When we use saliva, it's always preferable to use the patient's, not your own. Open, please. Good. The audience is chuckling as they're supposed to. Okay. Now we have a little bit of excess, so we'll just blow that off, and now it looks great. And as before, we'll bead and flow the Duralay into the canal, and then follow with the post. Placing small portions of the Duralay right into the canal, and then following by placing the paintbrush into the canal so that any air that's trapped is evacuated. We do this as rapidly as we can because, of course, we don't want the Duralay polymerizing inside the root canal space. So we keep going until we really have it fully loaded up. And then once again, take the plastic pin, dip it into the monomer, and seat it all the way into the canal. After it's seated, it's allowed to just assume a passive position, and to provide a little bit more stability, we'll tack it with just another drop of Duralay right at the top of the pattern. Now, once again, timing is critical. If I were to try to remove this at the moment, it would probably pull the green pin right out of the Duralay. If I wait too long, it may then be very difficult to retrieve. My first step is to free up the borders of the material that is laying on the residual tooth structure. Because if this polymerizes against that, when I try to retrieve this pattern, it may very well hold it in place. And it starts to stretch out. And it's starting to get a little bit of body. Now it's time to test it. See if the entire mass is moving with the pin. And if I can keep my fingers out of the way, well, they're elevated. You can see the whole mass is coming with it. And removes totally. And back in. And now, as is the case with acrylic, we'll keep taking it in and out until it's set correctly. And as was the case with the first example, there, of course, is not very good marginal adaptation around the periphery of the base of the core, but I don't care because I'm going to cut that off, refine it, and start from scratch with the base of the core. I feel a little resistance as I'm taking this in and out. There's the slightest snap fit. Part of this post is going into an undercut that's within the root canal system. As I'm taking this in and out, I'm actually refining the surface of the post, reshaping it just by the act of withdrawal and replacement. And it now has a little bit less resistance. But as I do this, I make certain that I don't deviate in any direction. I I don't want to move it mesially, distally, palatally, facially. It must just go in and out following the path of insertion of the long axis, if you will, of that post space, so that when it's all set, it does not move and wobble within the system. Now again, I'm testing this to see if it's thoroughly set up, and it is. And it's not moving. The green pin is moving, but nothing's moving within the root canal system. Okay, so much for the post. We'll trim the somewhat ratty flash of the core and then start to build up the core part of the pattern. Close for sec. Once again, I'm using a Fisher burr, cutting away from the tissue surface, removing all of the erratic margins that were the result of me poking at them and clearing them with the Explorer. And I want to carefully inspect it to make sure that there's no flash on the tissue surface. Thank you. There's a little bit of flash up here on the top, and we'll remove that with the Explorer. But it's that type of flash that if it were found underneath would prevent this from seating thoroughly, and we don't want that to happen. It must go back in position all the way. So there we are in position. Now, you may have noticed that at first I was a little bit puzzled as to which the orientation was for this. And when something is this flat, if you're going to be taking it out and in and out and in, and you want to be certain that you know where the facial is, it can be helpful to place a little notch in the facial part of the green base of the pattern. And now we know, just by looking at this, which side is which as we proceed with the rest of the buildup. Alright, so there we are. Now, as I suggested before, there are numerous ways of building this up. Some people like to cut this off and use perhaps a crown former and build what essentially looks like a big red tooth and then cut it with a handpiece and diamonds into the shape of a preparation. I prefer to leave this sprue in position because I just think it's safer for investing the pattern if the entire pattern can be attached right to the top of the cone when you're investing. So I'm going to build up this pattern using bead and flow into a pattern that is 99% complete and ready for casting. And then upon completion of casting and try-in, there's minimal refinement to do in metal, although there will be some. So now the goal is to, with the paintbrush, create a preparation. And I'll begin by reviewing the parameters that I'm looking for. First of all, I'll remove the pin, and I'd like you to close, please. This gives me an idea as to where the lingual surface, palatal surfaces of the preparation should be. Next, you may open. And right here we have the incisal edge of number 7. Comparing that in position to the incisal edge of number 10, it would be right about here. With 2 millimeters of incisal reduction, our post should be right about here. So now I have an idea as to how high I need to make the pattern. And I'll begin by creating corners. Simply holding the Duralay in position with the paintbrush, creating the distal incisal corner. And I hold the paintbrush in position until it's willing to stay in that shape without slumping. We'll then do the same for the mesial incisal corner. I'll now begin to build up the margins, and I'll begin at the most difficult location. The area that's hardest to reach is where I will begin. And that would be the distal lingual corner. And I'm holding the brush in position so that the material doesn't slump beyond the margins of the preparation. Now we'll continue around the distal surface. And I'm wiping it away from the facial because we don't need a post in an area that needs to be prepared for porcelain fused to metal. So this area will stay indented on the shoulder. I have a little excess that I don't care for right there, which I'll remove. And we'll just now for the medial. So we're starting to build up the base. Now, the most difficult corner is the distal lingual corner, so we'll start to work that. And I'll attach a little bit of the material to that distal incisal corner and arc it down to the distal lingual gingival portion. I'm still working on that distal lingual line angle. Very good. And you can see from the facial how applying this from the palatal surface, we're starting to build up those components of that distal lingual corner and the distal wall. Now I'll come from the facial approach. Remove a little excess where it's not necessary on that border. And we're beginning to achieve on the distal surface the proper taper to the distal wall. Again, we have a little excess here on the facial that's unnecessary. It's true that you can leave that for future trimming. But if we can get the pattern as close as possible to its final configuration while it's being fabricated, it does save time at the next visit when you have the casting. And you're in the process of refining it as the perfect prototype preparation. All right, and now we can run this in the same fashion along the mesial line angle. See, by having establish those corners to begin with, these additions don't slump as much as they would if you were trying to build it from the base up. It allows you to get a wall with minimum taper. In a sense, I'd like to thank that cell phone for ringing. because it does give some proof that this is happening in the year 2006 as opposed to 1978 when I started here. One could be confused because the techniques haven't changed in 28 years. Okay, now we're starting to get something that looks a little bit like preparation. We have reasonably parallel mesial and distal walls. We can refine those with the appropriate diamonds, afrits, and metals to get our 6-degree taper. We have a two-plane effect on the facial surface. It may be overdone a little bit right in this zone. There's a height of contour bulge right here that will need to be trimmed. But we know that essentially the gingival third, the gingival half should be parallel with the long axis of the tooth, and then it would kick over in the incisal or occlusal third to follow the slope proportionally with the adjacent teeth. So that has already begun. On the palatal aspect, the distal line angle is looking fairly reasonable, but the mesial line angle is void. So that's the next area to approach. By working the base of the gingival surface and then the line angle, we wind up with a lingual fossa that looks very, very much like the final preparation product. Nothing was added in this zone. As this wall was built, and the base was confirmed. Now, we know that the gingival third of the lingual surface is essentially parallel to the gingival third to half of the facial surface. Where's the parallelism? If we look at the remaining anterior teeth, we'll notice the lingual fossa goes almost all the way down to the gingival margin. That there is little gingival third, except perhaps on this crown. What does this mean to us? It means then that perhaps we should raise this wall and give it a little parallelism with the facial for the time being. And that way it's there if we need it, and we can always reduce it if it's redundant. So I'm going to build up a little gingival wall. I'm also looking for undercuts in the walls of the pattern. And I see a hint of one along the mesial aspect, down the gingival third. I'm just running a little bit more thoroughly in to fill that. Okay, now, the presumption is that I followed the long axis of the tooth, because I followed the long axis of the pin, which goes right down into the tooth. But I am going to consult the radiograph just to see if that all makes sense. Now, when I take a look at this particular radiograph, I notice that this root merges slightly to the mesial. Now, we'd expect it to be straight up and down or have a distal inclination, but this particular root does indeed go to the mesial. I don't know whether or not you can actually see this clear enough, but we can include a photo of it in the process of showing this tape. Alrighty? But that confirms the fact that I am indeed along the long axis. So now what I'll do is check to make sure that all of this has set, and then I'll remove it and inspect it for any surfaces that need to be amended. Oh, yes, there are. A couple little things here and there. There's a little void right here. There's a little void right there, and there's a little void right here. All right, I'm going to place some Duralay into those little areas of void and then immediately reinsert it so that when it cures, it will be a nice, hard, crisp, clean addition. Remember, if this material cures where there's not a warm, moist environment, the monomer evaporates far too quickly and you get a chalky addition. So I'll add and then right back in the middle. It's critical when adding to be certain that none of the additional material gets on the tissue side of the base of the core, otherwise it won't seep thoroughly. So it's just to fill the voids, not to get into any unnecessary areas. And as soon as it's painted in, right back into position. And none of that, of course, was on the margin, so it's safe to now test it for stability. And as I wiggle my finger back and forth, with it fully seated, there's minimum movement. So we'll now just let this sit until those last little additions have set, and that completes the post and core pattern. Thank you very much. One final thought. Any undercuts within the root canal system must either be removed or blocked out before fabrication of the custom cast post and core pattern.